welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, you've given us quite the task this week, basically the entire Unit 3 syllabus. We're talking population ecology, human demography. It's a huge amount of ground to cover for this test.
It really is. But think of this deep dive as building a mental map. We're taking all those concepts from your lectures, niches, growth curves, all that, and connecting the dots so you can see the bigger picture.
From tiny niches to huge global trends.
Exactly. If you understand how, say, raw selected strategies link to population booms and how that fits into the bigger demographic transition model, you'll be in great shape for the test.
All right, sounds like a plan. Let's break it down into maybe 3 main areas. First, individual species stuff, K versus R, generalist, specialist.
Good start. Then second, how populations actually work, dynamics, carrying capacity, limiting factors.
And third, the big one, the human picture, age structure, demography, art impact.
Perfect, let's dive in.
Okay, first things first. This idea of the ecological niche, it feels foundational.
It absolutely is. Think of it less like an address and more like a species' entire profession. It's everything it eats, where it lives, how it interacts, the whole job description. The sources really emphasize it's the total scope of how and where it can live.
Right, but then there's that key distinction, the potential versus the reality.
Precisely. You've got the fundamental niche. That's like the absolute dream scenario. Everywhere the organism could possibly survive if there were no competition, no predators.
The theoretical maximum.
Yeah, the theoretical. But life usually gets in the way. Competition, resource limits, that shanks the possibilities down to the realized niche.
So the realized niche is where it actually lives and thrives day to day, like those pine trees you mentioned that could grow lots of places but only end up on certain slopes because of competition.
Exactly. The gap between fundamental and realized tells you a lot about the competitive pressures in that environment.
And how wide or narrow that realized niche is. That leads us to generalist versus specialist, right?
Spot on. A niche generalist has a really broad, realized niche. Think raccoons. They can eat almost anything, live almost anywhere. They're adaptable, like those musicians who can play any genre.
Okay, so adaptable is key. What about the specialist then?
Niche specialists are the opposite. Very narrow niche. They might only eat one type of plant or live in a very specific temperature range. Think koalas and eucalyptus.
Highly efficient at that one thing, I guess.
Super efficient. But the downside is massive vulnerability. If their one specific resource disappears or the environment changes slightly, they're in real trouble, much faster than a generalist would be.
Okay, got it. Now let's shift gears slightly to reproductive strategies. This K-selected versus Y-selected thing comes up constantly. Quality versus quantity.
That's the core idea. R-selected species, the R is for rate, think growth rate, they go for quantity.
So lots and lots of offspring.
Loads, usually small body size, short lifespan, mature really fast. They put almost zero energy into parental care. Think insects, bacteria, weeds, maybe acorns just flood the environment. High biotic potential, as they say.
Betting that sheer numbers mean some will survive.
Exactly, it's a numbers game. Then you flip it for K-selected species. The K refers to carrying capacity.
Ah, so they live closer to the environmental limit.
Right, these are typically larger animals, longer lifespans. Humans, elephants, whales, we have very few offspring over our lifetime.
Low biotic potential.
Very low. But the energy investment in each one, it's huge. Years of parental care, teaching, protecting, quality over quantity.
So what's the big takeaway for the test here? Why does this distinction matter so much?
It matters hugely for conservation and understanding vulnerability. K-selected species, because they reproduce so slowly and invest so much, are much slower to recover from population crashes or environmental changes.
Longer generation times means slower adaptation, too.
Definitely. They just can't evolve quickly like Y-selected species sometimes can. It makes them inherently more prone to extinction when things go south. Think about, say, whales versus bacteria.
Okay, that makes sense for individual species strategies. Let's zoom out now to the whole population level. We need to understand those growth curves, the J and the S.
Right, so the simplest model is that J curve, exponential growth. Unlimited resources, no checks. The population just skyrockets. It's not very realistic for long.
Because in reality, there are limits.
Always. Which brings us to the S curve, logistic growth. The population starts exponentially, but then as resources get scarcer or predators increase or waste builds up, the growth rate slows down.
And it levels off, right? That plateau at the top.
That plateau is carrying capacity, or K. It's the theoretical maximum number of individuals that a specific environment can sustainably support over time. You often see it as a dashed line on graphs.
But, oh, here's the scary part you mentioned earlier. That K isn't fixed, is it?
No, and this is critical. What the sources call biospheric degradation, basically. Human activity like construction, pollution, habitat destruction, even building massive data centers, it's constantly lowering the carrying capacity for countless other species.
So while our population might still be growing, we're shrinking the potential space for everything else.
That's the grim reality, year after year.
Okay, so let's look at what causes that S-curve to bend. The limiting factors. Density-dependent versus independent. Need to get this straight.
Right. Density-dependent factors are things that bite harder when the population is crowded.
Like,
Competition is the big one for food, water, nesting sites, mates. Also, disease spreads much faster in dense populations. Predation can increase too, as prey become easier to find.
so more deer packed into an area means less food per deer, and diseases spread easily. Makes sense.
Then you have density-independent factors. These guys don't care how crowded it is.
Natural disasters.
Exactly.
They-
A hurricane, a sudden freeze, a volcanic eruption, a severe drought. These events can wipe out a huge chunk of a population regardless of whether it was dense or sparse to begin with. If the water freezes, the fish die, whether there were 10 or 1,000.
Can they interact, though? Like a density-independent event makes things worse for density-dependent reasons?
Oh, absolutely. Think about that drought that's density-independent. But what happens? All the animals crowd around the few remaining water sources.
Ah, so now density matters.
Exactly. Suddenly, competition for that water becomes intense, stress increases, disease spreads like wildfire through the weakened, crowded animals. The independent event triggers or worsens the dependent factors.
Okay, that interaction is key. And briefly, population distribution patterns. We tend to clump, right?
We do. While you can see uniform, like territorial birds, or random, like some plants, clumped distribution is most common. Organisms gather where life sources are. Humans clump around jobs, water, cities. Animals clump around an oasis, a food patch. Resources dictate clumping.
All right, let's pivot to us, humans. For the test, those age structure diagrams, population pyramids, seem crucial.
They are absolutely essential. They're like a snapshot of a country's demographic past and a prediction of its future. You have to be able to read them.
So, the classic, wide base, pointy top triangle.
That's your dead giveaway for a rapidly developing country. Lots of young people at the bottom, high birth rate, tapering off very quickly towards the top, historically lower life expectancy, tougher conditions. Think Nigeria, for example. Huge growth momentum built in.
And we use developing now, not older terms.
Right. It's more accurate and respectful terminology.
Okay, contrast that with a developed country. What does this pyramid look like?
Much more like a column, or sometimes even narrower at the base than in the middle. Fewer babies being born relative to the adult population, people living longer. It indicates slow growth, stable population, or even shrinking.
Like Italy or Japan?
Exactly. Though, interestingly, the U.S. pyramid can look a bit messy or skewed sometimes, reflecting internal inequalities in things like healthcare access affecting life expectancy across different groups.
So these shapes directly connect to the demographic transition model, DTM.
Right.
That's the bigger process these pyramids illustrate.
Precisely. The DTM maps out how birth rates and death rates change as a country develops economically and socially, usually described in 4, maybe 5 stages.
And the key stage for understanding that shift from pyramid to column is stage 3.
Stage 3 is critical. Death rates have already fallen thanks to better sanitation, medicine, food. But in stage 3, the birth rate starts to plummet.
Why then?
It's largely driven by urbanization and changing economics. People move off farms into cities. Kids stop being, well, free farm labor and become expensive dependents needing education, clothing, space.
The cost-benefit changes.
Fundamentally. Plus, women often gain more access to education and employment, further reducing the incentive or need for large families. That's the big shift that slows population growth.
In stage 4 is low birth and death rates, stable population. What about stage 5?
Stage 5 is the new frontier, really. It's where the birth rate falls below the death rate. So you have population decline, negative growth. We're seeing this in places like South Korea, Spain, Italy.
An aging population, which raises a whole host of other issues.
Absolutely. Now, shifting to our impact, the ecological footprint. How does that work? It's a measure of consumption. Basically, it calculates how much land and water area a human population requires to produce the resources it consumes and absorb its waste, usually expressed as how many Earths we'd need if everyone lived like, say, the average American.
A pretty sobering calculation, usually.
It definitely puts our consumption, often tied to GDP growth, into perspective against planetary limits.
And finally, this concept of the tragedy of the commons. Seems like a classic environmental dilemma.
It is Garrett Hardin's idea from the 60s. He argued that any resource shared by many individuals, where each acts in their own rational self-interest, will inevitably be overexploited and depleted.
The classic example being shared grazing land. Everyone puts on one more cow until the pasture collapses.
Right. Or think about it in reverse, like pollution. It's cheaper for an individual factory to dump waste into the shared air or water, the commons, than to pay for expensive purification. The individual gains, the commons suffers.
Hardin's outlook was pretty bleak, suggesting only privatization or strict government control could solve it. Did the sources offer any wiggle room there?
Yes, thankfully. They mention Eleanor Ostrom's work. She actually won a Nobel for this. She showed that, contrary to Hardin's certainty, communities can and often do successfully manage common resources through local rules, trust, and self-governance. It's not always a tragedy.
So there's a third way beyond just selling it off or having the government dictate everything.
Exactly. Understanding that nuance that it's not always inevitable doom is important. #tag outro. So heading into the test, keep these key tools sharp. The K versus R trade-off and what it means for vulnerability, how to instantly read an age structure diagram and connect it to the DTM stages, and critically, knowing the difference between density-dependent and independent limiting factors.
Those frameworks seem essential. And here's a final thought to chew on, connecting that DTM stage 5 back to the commons idea. If developed nations continue into negative growth, you get fewer working-age people supporting a larger elderly population.
A shrinking workforce, rising healthcare and pension costs.
Exactly. Will the commons of Social Security healthcare systems be sustainable? Or will societies face their own kind of tragedy of the commons as they try to manage the costs of an aging, shrinking population? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, review those notes, think about how these concepts link together, and you should be well prepared. Good luck with the test.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.